Hi guys. So, can you fix back pain for good, or can you build a pain-free back that lasts, basically? Yes, you can. So a lot of questions, we always start with the answer, it depends, especially if you're familiar with Professor Stuart McGill's work and approach. In this case, I would say the answer is yes, so long as. And there's two things that we need to do. And it all goes back to the analogy of thinking of the back and the amount of work it will tolerate before it gets aggravated, like a bank balance. So the general idea is that if you keep a nice, healthy bank balance, it doesn't get too low, doesn't get overdrawn, the back isn't going to have a flare-up, isn't going to feel grouchy, isn't going to feel irritable. So there's two things we need to manage. One is probably the most important, a lot of people sort of gloss over or don't do a good enough job with, is managing the withdrawals. So those are what we call your pain triggers or aggravators. So those are movements and postures that deplete that bank account. So that could be, awkward lifting or heavy bending and twisting and things that are a little bit, too demanding on the back as the day goes on. Or it could be more posture based, how you sit. You tend to sort of slump in a chair over a laptop on the couch for hours on end. Do you tend to slump looking at your phone for hours on end? Have you got a poor setup maybe at work? The chair and the desk aren't quite good enough for you, and you're in a bad position for long hours, because again, those will slowly deplete that bank account as well. So our first goal is to always understand for you what your pain triggers are, clearly identify them, and then remove them and find alternatives to them as much as possible. So we might not always get it 100% perfect, but the idea is the more we minimize those withdrawals on the bank account, the more we've got left in reserve for the times that we can't be as good as we'd like to be. So that's the most important thing, minimizing your withdrawals. So identifying and removing your pain triggers and your pain aggravators, both active and movement based, and passive, which is posture, like I'm now, a bit sort of slumped, and a slumped posture for long hours is a big one for a lot of people. The other side of it is now the deposits for that bank account. So that's those are the exercises and the movements and the training that you do that builds that bank account up. So we need to be very specific for each person, especially in the early stages. A lot of it is about addressing your weaknesses. Look at the things, look at the skills, the strengths and control over muscles that you're missing first. Work on those weaknesses as individual components. So things like, Stuart McGill's big three for core stability. So McGill curls, side bridges, and bird dogs are a good starting place for a lot of people. Not all, but for a lot of people. Then potentially the next biggest thing to look at is how well your hips function. So things like clamshells, prone hip extensions, glute bridges, getting control of those glutes. And then you need to look at bigger, more useful movements where you put all those components together, and more importantly, learn to use them all together at the same time in a back sparing way. So things like squat movements, hip hinges like RDLs, kettlebell swings, squats, deadlifts, all those big, strong movements, all those joints and components are working together. How well can you get those components of the orchestra or band to work together at the same time, so that you can lift heavy things, you can move well, but still keep the back safe. So that's very important. So can you build a pain-free back or fix back pain? Yes, so long as you minimize your withdrawals, so identify and remove your pain triggers, and you're consistent with doing the work you need to do to keep that bank account as large as you need it. So doing the movements and the maintenance work to keep everything moving well and moving together, and making sure that any weaknesses you're not prone to don't start to come back again. Because if you get complacent with one of those two lists or both, that bank account will start to deplete, and that's when the back pain comes back in. That's what happens to a lot of people. They do well for short periods, and the back starts to settle, and then they go back to their bad habits because they don't understand what's creating the problem, and then it kicks off that vicious cycle again. They end up just spending years of, it's sort of good for a bit, and it goes bad, they get some treatment, goes good again, and it goes bad, and then just doing this for years and years and years. So that's how you break yourself out of that sort of good versus bad day cycle. Identify your aggravators and remove them, and then focus on all the works, particularly any of your weaknesses that you tend to have. Keep everything well tuned and working well together in a back sparing way. Do those two things, and you will have fixed your back pain for good.